Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 331 I Want to be the Emperor. Julius II didn't want to talk to Marin now. The extremely complicated problem in his eyes could be violently solved by throwing money in Marin's eyes. But Julius II couldn't refute it. Why didn't I have such a rich man to support me back then? Julius II thought depressedly. In fact, when Julius II competed with Alexander VI for the position of Pope, he was defeated by Alexander VI's throwing money trick. Back then, Alexander VI won the election of Pope by spending all the wealth of the Borgia family. If I had more money, I wouldn't lose to that guy Alexander VI. But after all, Robert is his grandson, and Julius II can only support him as Pope. It's just. Marin, when Robert grows up, he can't run for Pope immediately. He has to wait until he's 50 or 60 years old. It's a question whether you're still alive by then. I don't think Caesar will be willing to spend so much money to support Robert's campaign for Pope. Giuliano, who told you that the Pope must be 50 or 60 years old? Marin asked back. Only bishops in their 50s and 60s have enough prestige and appeal. These can all be bought with money. In my opinion, 30 years old is enough to run for Pope. Marin waved his hand and said. Julius II thought about it, and it was true. The prestige and appeal he mentioned can indeed be obtained by spending money. As long as you get 100 cardinals, those are really not a big deal. After all, the election of the Pope has entered the age of money. What Julius II didn't know was that the next Pope after his death, Leo X, became Pope at the age of 38. And Leo X came from the financially powerful Medici family. It was because of the efforts of Leo X and Clement VII, two popes from the Medici family, that the Republic of Florence, which had been annexed by the Papal States, later became independent from the Papal States and established the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Marin made up his mind to support Leo X's succession after the death of Julius II. Why? Because without Leo X's large-scale sale of indulgences, there would be no Martin Luther to initiate the Reformation. Without religious wars, how could Marin fish in troubled waters? Counting on Julius II to engage in indulgences? Sorry, Julius II is a smart man who attaches great importance to reputation, and he is not as shameless as Leo X. Therefore, it is better to support Leo X, let him provoke conflicts, and lead to the great god Martin Luther. At that time, he can stand on the side of Catholicism in the name of defender of religion, and then defeat Martin Luther's protector, Elector Frederick III of Saxony. Even, he could seek to annex the territory of the Electorate of Saxony and the title of the Elector. With this title, he might not be unable to run for the Holy Roman Emperor after Maximilian I died. You know, Charles V only spent 850,000 gold coins when he ran for the Holy Roman Pope. Is it enough to pay 1 million gold coins? If not, add another 1.5 million gold coins. As for Maximilian I's grandson Charles V, because Marin saved Prince Juan of Spain, Charles V would definitely not have the opportunity to inherit the Spanish throne, and could only inherit the territories of Austria and Burgundy. By then, he might not even be able to take out 850,000 gold coins. The Fugger family, which had lent money to Charles V in history, might not be willing to lend such a large sum of money to help him run for the throne when they saw that Charles V did not become the King of Spain. By then, he might very well lose to his more wealthy opponent, King Francis I of France. Rather than letting the throne of the Holy Roman Empire fall to the demon, it is better to take it up by myself. At worst, I can give Charles V some other compensation at that time. When Marin was imagining his future of running for the Holy Roman Emperor after the death of his benefactor Maximilian I, Julius II patted his shoulder. What are you thinking about, Marin? I want to be the emperor. Marin blurted out without thinking. What? Emperor? Do you want to betray Maximilian I? Julius II was surprised. Who said I want to betray him? I just want to wait for him to die and participate in the election for the throne. No one stipulates that the Holy Roman throne can only be inherited by the Habsburg family. That's true. Julius II nodded. Moreover, he only knew that Marin could afford the money for the election for the throne. It's a pity that when Maximilian I dies, I may die before him. Otherwise, I can still crown you and ascend the throne. Julius II said regretfully. Marin thought that it was true. Julius II died in 1503. Maximilian I died in 1519. It's okay. At most, you can ask the next pope to help with the coronation. As long as you can afford the money, your next pope will be happy. Unexpectedly, this sentence annoyed Julius II. You little bastard, are you looking forward to my early death? Maybe I will live longer than Maximilian I. Julius II said angrily. You said that first. Marin said innocently. Alas, the Rovere family has declined, because the Borgia family killed several mainstay Mesozoic figures. After my death, I am afraid it will decline. I don't know who my successor will be. I think it will be Cardinal Giovanni, Leo X, of the Medici family. Marin thought about it and decided to reveal some of the history he knew to Julius II. Giovanni of the Medici family? Are you kidding? He's only 29 years old, only 2 years older than you. He's 29 now. When you go to heaven, he will be 40 or older, right? Marin exaggerated Julius II's life expectancy to make the old man happier. That's true. But why do you think so highly of him? Julius II asked curiously. Because the Medici family is rich. Julius II was silent. He thought about it and realized that it was true. Although other cardinals are eligible to run for the Pope, they cannot compete with the Medici family in terms of financial strength. The few bishops who can compete are not younger than him and are expected to die earlier than him. However, several other Italian families that can compete with the Medici family in terms of financial strength do not have cardinals of the right age. Even if there are, they are too young. After a dozen years, when he dies, the Vatican will never choose a child as the Pope. At the very least, he has to be a middle-aged cardinal in his 30s or 40s. So, after my death, it is very likely that Giovanni of the Medici family will take over. What do you need me to do? Please help me get in touch with the Medici family, and I will give them some benefits in trade. When the time is right, if Giovanni gets into trouble or needs your help, you can hint to him that it is effective to ask me for help to mediate. Then, try to make him owe me a favor. When he becomes Pope, I will elect the King of Germany and ask him to help him be crowned Emperor, and there will be no problem. At the same time, I can also ask him to help take care of Robert. Julius II nodded and approved of Marin's method. Chapter 332, The Rimini Problem. By the way, there is something I want to discuss with you. Julius II suddenly said. What's wrong, Giuliano? Marin was puzzled. It's a problem in the Rimini area. Rimini area? What happened? Marin was puzzled. The coastal areas of the Rimini area are occupied by the damn Venetians. Julius II said bitterly. No way. Occupying the land of the Holy See, the Venetians got their heads kicked by a donkey? Marin was shocked. It's like this, the Rimini area was taken from the Malatesta family by Caesar Borgia in 1500. Venice took advantage of the opportunity of the Holy See to change the Pope and took control of the Rimini area in the name of helping the Malatesta family regain their territory. That's not all, they also controlled Ravenna, an important city on the Adriatic coast that was once the capital of Western Rome. In fact, Julius II might not look down on the city of Rimini, but Ravenna was different. Ravenna was the capital of the Roman Empire from the time of Roman Emperor Honorius to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Later, when the Eastern Roman Empire recovered Italy from the Goths, it also used Ravenna as the center of its rule over Italy. Therefore, Ravenna is a very important and historically significant ancient city in Italy. Such a city originally belonged to the Papal States, but was taken away by Venice. It would be strange if Julius II was not angry. Not to mention Julius II, the entire Vatican was very depressed. Although the Venetians nominally used the Maritasino family to rule the entire region, everyone with a discerning eye knew that it was actually the Venetians who ruled the region. Marin was really speechless about the brains of the Venetians. Indeed, because of corruption in the Papal States, the bishops divided up most of the tithes, resulting in the Papal States being able to feed few troops. However, the Papal States is the center of European Catholicism. Although the military strength is average, the Pope has unparalleled appeal throughout Europe. As long as the Pope calls out, there are still many people who respond. In fact, if the Papal States were not short of troops and the newly conquered Florence Republic also needed a large number of troops to garrison, the 7,000 East Frisian troops led by state alone would be enough to retake the Rimini area. Marin, I plan to form an anti-Venetian alliance, and bring in countries such as France, Spain, Austria, and the Italian states to oppose Venice together. Venice has been too arrogant in recent years. Relying on its wealth, it has been rampant in Italy and has even bullied the Papal States. Julius II said worriedly. Form an anti-Venetian alliance. Marin was stunned, but soon realized that this was not the famous Cambrai alliance in history. However, history has proved that the formation of this alliance was stupid. Because, although it weakened Venice, it reintroduced the French tiger into Italy, which was not worth the loss. Therefore, Julius II quickly changed his position and joined Venice to fight against the threat of the French. So, Marin reminded, Giuliano, I oppose your idea. Especially the way of winning over Spain and France, it is absolutely inviting wolves into the house. Oh, what's the matter? Julius II was very curious about why Marin said that. In his opinion, it was a very satisfying thing to win over so many powers to suppress Venice, and he didn't have to do it himself. Giuliano, no matter how arrogant Venice is, it is just a small state in Italy. Although it has money, its military combat effectiveness is just as so. Therefore, it can be arrogant only because the armies of the Italian states are too useless. At this point, Julius II blushed. The useless armies of the Italian states mentioned by Marin also included the army of the Papal States. Compared with Venice, Spain and France are the real worries of Italy. You know, these two countries have vast areas and large populations. Especially France, with a population of 15 million, has amazing potential. And Louis XII obviously has great ambitions to annex Italy. Therefore, for Italy, the threat from France ranks first, and the threat from Spain is also not small, which can be ranked second. Preventing any actions of these two countries in Italy is the most important thing. How can we give them an excuse to interfere in Italian affairs? You know, it is easy to invite their troops to enter Italy, but it is difficult to let them go. In fact, Marin wanted to say, it is easy to invite gods, but difficult to send them away, but considering that Julius II is the biggest charlatan in Europe, he still didn't say this. What you said seems to make sense, but how to curb the expansion of the Venetians? Julius II frowned and said. Obviously, he also considered the risk of letting the French re-enter Italy. But Venice is so strong. This is easy. If it doesn't work, you can use the method I used to take down the Republic of Florence. You mean, use the German bishopric to exchange for the Rimini region to invite other countries' troops to attack the Venetians? Julius II said. Yes, that's right. Although the Venetians are strong, they still use Italian mercenaries. You should know how bad Italian mercenaries are. As long as you have enough troops to control other areas of the Papal States and the Florentine region, stayed 7,000 people and the new 3,000 German mercenaries will be enough to defeat the Venetians. The financial resources of the Republic of Venice are too terrifying. If you can avoid taking action, that would be the best. How about this, when I go back this time, I will go to Venice and persuade Venice to give up the Rimini region. If it succeeds, that would be the best. If it doesn't work, wait until you recruit a group of new soldiers to fill the defense gaps in other areas of the Papal States and the Florentine region, and then let Stade take back the Rimini region with 10,000 troops. Why? Do you have a relationship with the Venetians? Julius II asked curiously. So, Marin told Julius II about the sale of half of the captured prisoners, horses and armor to the Venetians. I was wondering why you could quickly become a powerful prince from a small wandering knight. It turns out that you concealed half of the captured and sold it to the Venetians. You are so brave. If Maximilian I knew about it, wouldn't he be so angry that he would peel off your skin? This is how the world is. The bold will die of overeating, and the timid will die of starvation. Besides, if it wasn't for exchanging a noble title and territory with him, I might have sold all the captured to the Venetians. Even if he found out, so what? At worst, I can just run away. Marin really wanted to run away. As long as he had money, he could go to another country and buy a title and territory. Wouldn't that be easy? Alexander VI bought a fiefdom for his son from Spain, and it only cost him 50,000 gold coins. Well, since you have a good relationship with the Venetians, I'll let you try it first. It would be best if the Rimini issue could be resolved peacefully. If that doesn't work, I'll let you send troops and give it a try. Even if it fails, we can use the bishopric to exchange for other people's troops. For example, your Emperor Maximilian I has not yet been crowned. I'll use this condition to ask him to send troops, and I think he will definitely be happy. Chapter 333, Marin presents a picture. Julius II was right. If he was willing to use the coronation as a condition, Maximilian I would definitely be happy to help deal with Venice. In fact, the Austrians had long coveted Venice, a rich country close at hand. However, the Venetians were extremely wealthy and could hire many mercenaries. The Habsburg family, which had always been poor, was not sure that they could take Venice. In fact, Austria was already a relatively developed region in the Holy Roman Empire. The climate here was warm, agriculture was developed, and mining was also developed, with many silver mines and copper mines. In total, the annual income of the Habsburg family was not low. However, the Habsburg family, an old traditional aristocratic family, also had many members, and there were many powerful people. Therefore, so much income needed to be shared with many people. In addition, the clansmen who managed industries in various places also manipulated it. Therefore, the taxes that finally fell into the hands of Emperor Maximilian I were not much. Therefore, the finances of Maximilian I have always been bad. In addition, although Maximilian I bought the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire under the matchmaking of Marin. However, European countries, except for those that are friendly with the Holy Roman Empire, do not recognize it. For example, France believes that even if Maximilian I bought the throne from the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, it is invalid without recovering Constantinople. The implication is to encourage Maximilian I to fight with the Ottoman Turkey. In addition, Grand Duke Ivan III of the Grand Duchy of Moscow also claimed to inherit the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire after marrying Princess Sophia. Upon learning that Maximilian I bought the throne from his uncle, Prince Vasily, the Crown Prince of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, angrily declared that the Eastern Roman throne can only be inherited by the bloodline of the Paleologos family. Maximilian I has no bloodline of the Paleologos family at all, and it is illegal for his uncle Andreas Paleologos to sell the throne to Maximilian I. However, Andres Paleologos angrily retorted Prince Vasily's statement, "Since you know that I am your uncle, how can you have the face to watch your uncles and family members have no food to eat?" Now he knows to jump out. Therefore, Andres Paleologos believes that although Vasily has the blood of the Paleologos family, he has no right to covet the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire because he does not care about the lives of royal family members. He would rather sell the throne to outsiders than to Vasily. However, although the former Emperor Andres Paleologos jumped out to endorse Maximilian I, France and some countries still do not recognize Maximilian I as the Eastern Roman Emperor. At this time, Maximilian I needs the support of the Holy See. If Julius II is willing to speak for him, I believe most countries will recognize it. Just like when Andreas Paleologos fled to Italy, the Vatican recognized his status as the Eastern Roman Emperor, and other Western European countries naturally followed suit. Therefore, whether it is the throne of the Holy Roman Empire or the throne of the Eastern Roman Empire, Maximilian I needs the support of Julius II. Especially for the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, if Julius II is willing to crown him, then no one in Europe will object. Similarly, as long as the Vatican recognizes it, Maximilian I's status as the Eastern Roman Emperor will also be legal. Because the Pope is a very important arbitrator. Therefore, among the kings of several major powers in Western Europe, the one that Julius II can most easily control is Maximilian I. For the legitimacy of the throne, Maximilian I is definitely willing to fight for the Vatican. The only thing to consider is whether Maximilian I's army can beat the Venetians. After all, the Venetians have a lot of money and can recruit several times more troops to fight. Although Maximilian I's Austrian army was strong in combat, it might not succeed in the face of numerical advantage. Of course, if it cooperated with the 10,000 troops of the Marin faction in the Papal States, it would be different. Austria and Venice are adjacent, separated only by the Alps. If Marin's army and Maximilian I's army were dispatched at the same time, the Venetians would inevitably be unable to take care of both ends. After all, Venice has never been a land power. If it is attacked from both sides, it will inevitably fail. A few days after Marin arrived in Rome, King Ferdinand II of Spain and King Manuel I of Portugal also arrived together. Manuel I took a fleet, passed the Strait of Gibraltar, and met Ferdinand II at the port of Barcelona. Although they are father-in-law and son-in-law, they do not get along well. Because the two have too many differences on the issue of India. Manuel I insisted that India belongs to Portugal and Spain should not interfere. Moreover, in the Treaty of Tordesillas approved by the previous Pope Alexander VI, the Eastern Hemisphere had been assigned to Portugal, and the Spaniards should go to develop his wild continent. But Ferdinand II believed that India did not belong to Portugal alone. The reason why the Treaty of Tordesillas was mistakenly signed before was because Columbus mistook the wild continent for India, and was deceived by the Portuguese to sign the unfair treaty. Moreover, it was also Pope Alexander VI who agreed to Spain's trade in India. In this way, the father-in-law and son-in-law with completely opposite positions actually fought on the ship during the voyage. If they had not been stopped by their men, one of the kings might have been injured. Later, the two kings simply stayed on their own warships and stopped meeting each other, so as not to fight again after meeting. After the ship arrived at the port near Rome, the two kings also got off the ship separately, without even saying hello to each other, and went into the city separately. After hearing about this situation, Julius II and Marin, the father-in-law and son-in-law, felt very funny. Ferdinand II and Manuel I, the father-in-law and son-in-law, were both kings, but they still quarreled, which was too discordant. Unlike Julius II and Marin, the father-in-law and son-in-law, they all conspired to plot against others. For example, this time, the father-in-law and son-in-law planned to plot against Ferdinand II and Manuel I. The strategy they set was to first trick Spain into giving up America. Then, they would unite with Spain to oppress Portugal and force Portugal to give up the idea of monopolizing India. Even some of the interests in Africa had to be given up. If it was Isabella I who came, Marin might not have the confidence to trick. However, when it was Ferdinand II who was only interested in Europe, not Isabella I who was interested in America, Marin was full of confidence. So, Marin took the map of Africa he had drawn himself and went to the residence where Ferdinand II was staying, intending to take advantage of the night to Zhang Song presented the map. No, it was, Marin presented the map. On this map of Africa, Marin marked in detail the information of the Songhai Empire in West Africa and the Gold Coast, now Ghana. At the same time, there is also information about the Great Zimbabwe Empire. Although the specific situation of the Great Zimbabwe Empire in this era is unknown, Marin still knows the area controlled by the Great Zimbabwe Empire. It is mainly the area north of the Limpopo River and south of the Zambezi River. Moreover, the ruins of the Great Zimbabwe Empire seem to be just north of the Limpopo River. Of course, this is not a problem. Just send someone to the coast of Mozambique and ask those Arab merchants. Because the city of Great Zimbabwe is the only stone city in southern Africa in this era. As long as you find out where the stone city is, you can find the Great Zimbabwe Empire. With this map similar to a treasure map, Marin walked firmly to the room where Ferdinand II was and started the big liar mode. Chapter 334, The Lame Man, Part 1. Marin, who was carrying the treasure map, entered the living room of Ferdinand II's temporary residence after getting the permission of Ferdinand II, and saw Ferdinand II sitting on a chair. So Marin hurriedly ran forward, bowed and saluted, "Meet your Majesty." "No need to be polite, Count Marin." Ferdinand II still gave Marin face. The reason why Marin was called Count, not Duke. It was because Marin also had the title of Count of the Wilderness, in Spain. Although Marin did not need to pay any tribute to Spain, the status of monarch and minister was there, and Marin had to abide by it. Ferdinand II had a very good impression of Marin. Why? Because Marin saved the life of his only son. For Ferdinand II, the other daughters were dispensable, and his son Prince Juan was the most important. Originally in history, when Prince Juan died, he was suspected of contracting lung disease, which was a terrifying disease that was fatal. But Ferdinand II went forward with great grief and hugged his son's body and cried, as if the sky had fallen. Queen Isabella I was not so excited, but watched from a distance, not daring to come forward, fearing that she would be infected by her son. It can be seen that Ferdinand II was a father who loved his son as much as his life. However, Ferdinand II completely ignored his daughter. After the death of the handsome King Philip, the husband of Juana, the mad woman, in order to control the power of the Kingdom of Castile, Ferdinand II coldly imprisoned his daughter Juana in the name of "madman cannot exercise power" to facilitate his control of the power of the Kingdom of Castile. Therefore, Ferdinand II is a typical example of favoring boys over girls. Now, Prince Juan is still alive and kicking, which makes Ferdinand II very pleasing to Marin. "By the way, Count Marin, what are you doing here for the negotiations between Spain and Portugal this time?" Ferdinand II was very curious about seeing Marin in Rome at this time. "The Pope summoned me. My mission is to introduce the details of Africa to the two majesties. Simply put, I am responsible for the explanation," Marin said frankly. "Explanation? It's really interesting. Let a powerful prince with the title of Duke be the narrator. The Pope is really generous." Ferdinand II laughed. "Ahem, that's because the relationship between me and the Pope is very good." Marin deliberately revealed some of his relationship with the Pope. Anyway, many people have speculated. From the fact that Marin lent troops to Julius II, escorted him back to Rome, and helped attack Florence, everyone can see that Marin and Julius II have a good relationship. Oh. Really? Can you tell me in detail why? Ferdinand II was obviously very interested in this kind of gossip. It's like this. At the beginning, His Majesty Julius II had a bad relationship with the previous pope. In fact, they were enemies, but Marin deliberately said so considering the close relationship between Alexander VI and Spain. Then, His Majesty Julius II hid in France. However, after Louis XII ascended the throne, he formed an alliance with His Majesty Alexander VI. His Majesty Julius II was afraid that the French would hand him over to His Majesty Alexander VI, so he left France. By chance, he came to East Frisia and met me by chance. Why didn't you tell His Majesty Alexander VI the news at that time? That would have been a great achievement. Ferdinand II asked curiously. At first, I didn't know he was Archbishop Rovere. It's just that I made friends with him by chance. After becoming friends, how could I betray him? Marin said calmly. Yes, that's right. But I have a question. That is, why did His Majesty Julius II take your army back to Rome after the death of His Majesty Alexander VI? Ferdinand II was very suspicious of this question. He suspected that it was Julius II who killed Alexander VI. However, he had no evidence and did not dare to speak nonsense. It's like this. Wasn't I previously canonized as the Duke of Egypt by His Majesty Maximilian I? Then, I planned to send troops to conquer Egypt. At the same time, His Majesty Julius II also planned to go to Egypt on the ship. Unexpectedly, he met a merchant ship leaving Rome at sea and heard the news of the death of His Majesty Alexander VI. So, His Majesty Julius II made a prompt decision to hire Schwartz and his 7,000 troops to escort him back to Rome to participate in the election of the Pope. This kind of rhetoric had been discussed by Marin and Julius II long ago, so it was naturally stress-free to say, and it was very reasonable. Well, you are such a lucky guy. Ferdinand II stopped worrying about it. Because, it was useless to worry about it. Alexander VI was close to Spain, but he was dead. It was not a stupid thing for a king to speak up for a dead person. Since you have a good relationship with His Majesty the Pope, then, Count Marin, can you tell me some inside information? Ferdinand II looked at Marin eagerly. Your Majesty, I came here for this matter. Tell me about it. Ferdinand II said impatiently. It's like this, His Majesty the Pope was originally very embarrassed. But I took out the map drawn by my teacher, the great sage Einstein, when he traveled in Africa. Your teacher also traveled to Africa? Ferdinand II was a little surprised. Of course, my teacher not only traveled to Africa, but also traveled throughout Asia. Before, the reason why Columbus was able to discover India earlier than the Gama was actually because I gave Columbus a rough map, which allowed him to find India first smoothly. Marin boasted proudly. Ah. So amazing. Ferdinand II was a little surprised. You know, before this, only a very small number of Venetian merchants had been to India. But the Venetian spices were also shipped by Arab and Egyptian ships. Even the Venetians knew little about India, let alone the situation on the African coast. It seems amazing that Marin's teacher knew that route. You know, before the Portuguese set off, they only knew the situation on the West African coast north of the Cape of Good Hope, and didn't know the situation on the East African side. Of course, my teacher is a great traveler who has traveled throughout Eurasia and Africa. Marin continued to pretend to be proud. So, does your teacher know the situation of the great empire in the East? Ferdinand II asked eagerly. Yes. Marin nodded without hesitation. Tell me about it. Ferdinand II said impatiently. Chapter 335, The Lame Man, Part 2. In Europe, because of Marco Polo's book, The Travels of Marco Polo, it is mentioned in The Travels of Marco Polo that the palace walls, house walls and ceilings of Dadu are covered with gold and silver, Japan has countless gold to build houses, and India is full of gold. Therefore, Europeans are so enthusiastic about going to the East. However, Marin has long regarded the East as his own private land. So Marin decided to break the fantasy of Europeans first. He said to Ferdinand II, Your Majesty, the descriptions in The Travels of Marco Polo are all made up. Marin poured a basin of cold water on Ferdinand II as soon as he came up. How could it be? Ferdinand II asked somewhat unwillingly. Then, Your Majesty, your fleet has also been to Calicut in India. Has your fleet commander reported that India is full of gold? Marin asked back. This. Ferdinand II immediately fell silent. Obviously, he had heard reports about India. It is true that there is wealth over there, but it has not reached the level of gold everywhere. So, is it also false that the walls of the Chinese palace are painted with gold? Of course it's false. In fact, the walls of the Chinese palace are mostly painted with red paint, called Red Wall Courtyard. Even in the main hall, only the emperor's throne is pure gold. The decoration of the palace is mostly copper. In fact, China is a country with a very short supply of gold and silver. Marin told Ferdinand II the cruel reality. Moreover, he really didn't lie. There was a shortage of gold and silver in the Ming dynasty, and even copper was relatively scarce. It's not that the total amount of gold, silver and copper in the Ming dynasty was small, but that it couldn't keep up with the needs of society. After all, the Ming dynasty had a large population, and on average, the amount of gold and silver held by each person was very small. Then Japan uses gold to build houses. It's simply bullshit. Japan is an island country with scarce materials. How can it have the capital to build houses with gold? Even their king is not so extravagant. My teacher has been to Japan in person. The houses there are basically made of wood, and there are no gold houses at all. Even the palace of the Japanese king is made of wood. Marin vowed. However, he was not lying. Japanese houses were indeed made of wood at that time. However, Japan's gold and silver reserves were indeed very large. Of course, Marin would never say this. Is Marco Polo lying to us? Ferdinand too was a little unbelievable. Your Majesty, wake up. Marco Polo is just a crappy little businessman. If there was really so much gold in China, India, and Japan when he went to the East, why didn't he bring back a lot of gold and become a rich man? If there was gold everywhere, he could have made a fortune by picking up some. However, he did not make a fortune and ended up in poverty. Obviously, he is a liar. Ferdinand too thought about it and it was true. If there was really gold everywhere in the East as described in The Travels of Marco Polo would have made a fortune by picking up some gold from the ground after more than 10 years in China. However, Marco Polo obviously did not make a fortune and ended up in prison. So, what Marin said makes sense. So, is China as prosperous as Marco Polo described? Ferdinand too asked without giving up. This is true. China is a unified and powerful dynasty with a population of more than 100 million. The people there live a stable and prosperous life with plenty of food. Then, can it colonize there? Ferdinand too asked eagerly. Your Majesty, this dynasty is a unified and powerful dynasty. Its total army exceeds 1 million, and it can dispatch 500,000 troops in a war. Your Majesty, can your army defeat it? Marin asked back with a smile. Maybe their civilization is low and their army weapons are backward. Ferdinand too did not give up. Let me tell you this, the Mongolian cavalry swept across Europe back then. You know this, right? Ferdinand too nodded. The Mongolian cavalry swept across Europe back then, but left a terrible impression in the hearts of Europeans. The Mongol Empire had hundreds of thousands of powerful cavalry, but it was this Mongol Empire that was destroyed by the current Chinese Ming Empire. Do you think that your tens of thousands of troops are more powerful than hundreds of thousands of Mongol cavalry? Ferdinand too was silent. After a while, Ferdinand too asked again, what if we trade with them? Obviously, Ferdinand too no longer dreamed of conquering China. It won't work. Marin said confidently. Why? Ferdinand too felt very strange. Isn't it normal for countries to trade? He began to suspect that Marin really deceived him. It's like this. The Ming Empire of China is very proud. They think that except for China, people in other places are uncivilized barbarians. What? It's really unreasonable. Ferdinand too was angry. How could civilized Europeans be barbarians? So, their country disdains copper barbarian trade. If you want to trade with them, there is only one way. What way? Ferdinand too asked cooperatively. That is, swear allegiance to their emperor and perform the grand ceremony of kneeling 3 times and bowing 9 times to their emperor. Become a slave of their emperor, and then they will allow you to pay tribute once a year, and then, like a poor beggar, they will reward you with something. Then, Marin also explained in detail what kneeling 3 times and bowing 9 times meant. It's really outrageous. Ferdinand too was furious. He was a great king of a European power, and he didn't have to kneel even if he met the Pope. At most, he would bow and salute. Are you lying to me? Ferdinand too asked suspiciously. Of course, I can swear in the name of God that everything I said is true. If there is a lie, you will go to hell after death. Marin said solemnly. He really didn't lie, the Ming dynasty was indeed so arrogant. The Portuguese tried every means to fail to successfully establish trade relations with the Ming dynasty. Later, they bribed local officials in Guangdong to find a foothold in Macau and secretly trade. In fact, if the Portuguese had a little more connections and could bribe important officials of the Ming dynasty or even the emperor, they would still have a chance to establish trade relations. Unfortunately, the Portuguese were not clear about the situation in the Ming dynasty. If they knew that Emperor Zhengde liked rare things, they might be able to get approval by casually presenting a few Western gadgets. It's just that they didn't know. Moreover, the local officials of the Ming dynasty would not tell the Portuguese about the ridiculous things of their own emperor. After all, family disgrace should not be made public. But Marin knew this very well, not to mention Emperor Zhengde himself. As long as the 8 tigers under Zhengde were bribed, the matter could be done. Of course, the sequelae is that after the 8 tigers fell, those civil servants might regret it. However, as long as Marin managed the perfume trade well and made the concubines and ladies in the capital inseparable from Marin's perfume, then the trade could not be stopped. Unless those civil servants wanted to cause unrest in the harem. Chapter 336, The Lame One, Part 2. Then where should I colonize? Ferdinand II was a little absent-minded. Your Majesty, you can colonize India. Marin reminded. India? India has a large population, and I don't know if we can defeat it. Ferdinand II was aware of the wealth of India. After all, his men had been investigating there for a long time. Your Majesty, India is different from China. China is a unified and powerful country. India, on the other hand, is a fragmented region. If you can't defeat the strong, can you still defeat the weak? Marin's words were very pertinent. Before the establishment of the Mughal Empire, India was indeed fragmented and easier to conquer. Otherwise, Babur, who was in Afghanistan, would not be able to enter India. The Spaniards mastered the large square formation, invented by Marin, and they still had the strength to fight. What do you mean? Ferdinand II's eyes lit up. Find a small state in southern India and occupy it as a foothold. Then, gradually erode India and become the master of India. Your Majesty, you know that India is the origin of pepper and other products are also very rich. As long as you occupy all of India, you will become a great emperor who is not inferior to the emperor of the Chinese dynasty. There is no emperor position in Europe, you can be crowned as the emperor of India. Marin bewitched. India. Emperor. Yes, India also has a population of nearly 100 million. If you occupy all of India, won't you be the great emperor of hundreds of millions of Indians? It seems to be the case. But, is India so easy to fight? Don't worry, Your Majesty, the Indians are now divided into pieces. If they are united, you may not be able to beat them. But if you pick them up one by one, after a few decades, India will belong to Spain. It seems to be the case. Ferdinand was moved. In Marin's eyes, His Majesty Ferdinand II was like Fan Wei who was fooled by Uncle Benchan. Moreover, although India was indeed divided into pieces at this time. But in northern India, Babur, a descendant of the Timurid Empire, has established a powerful kingdom in Afghanistan. With just one opportunity, Babur's cavalry can go south, occupy the most prosperous Ganges plain, and control the already weakened Delhi Sultanate. Even if Spain can gain a foothold in India, it will certainly be difficult to capture too many areas if it invests too few troops. When they finally expand to the north, they will encounter the Mughal Empire, which is in its heyday. Of course, that's all in the future. For now, Marin's plan is to trick Ferdinand II into playing hide-and-seek with Old Black in Africa. So, Marin saluted and said to Ferdinand II, Your Majesty, although India is rich, because there are too many people there, the princes are also strong. So, it takes a long time. It may take dozens or hundreds of years. Ferdinand II was silent. Indeed, it would take a long time for Spain to conquer a country as big as India alone. And he won't be able to see that time. Maybe his son Prince Juan can see it. But Marin deliberately kept it a secret. But what? Ferdinand II was indeed attracted. Why doesn't Your Majesty turn your attention to Africa? Africa? Is there anything worth paying attention to in Africa? Ferdinand II was puzzled. In his opinion, only Egypt and Morocco are relatively rich in Africa, and he would not want other places even if they were given to him. Please look at this map. Marin pointed to the map of Africa spread out on the table, which was the treasure map. Map master finally remembered me. Songhai Empire. Ferdinand II quickly saw the Songhai Empire marked in Latin by Marin, which was very conspicuous. I wonder if Your Majesty has heard of the legend of the Golden Sultan? Marin said mysteriously. Ferdinand II was confused for a while, and then he said leisurely, I would like to hear more about it. Obviously, Ferdinand II's history is not very good. But he is a king, so naturally someone will explain it to him. For example, isn't Marin in front of him a very good commentator? Marin just needed to fool Ferdinand II, so he acted as a commentator with great enthusiasm. A long, long time ago, in the early 14th century, there was a Mali Empire in West Africa, and they occupied the western part of the present Songhai Empire. Of course, the Mali Empire still exists now, but the Songhai Empire has deprived it of its best areas, that is, the areas that produce gold. Gold? Ferdinand II, who was careless just now, suddenly had his eyes lit up. Obviously, this was a money-loving king. Yes, back then, the Mali Empire produced half of the world's gold. Is the news reliable? Ferdinand II was excited. Half of the world's gold production. This is the rhythm of prosperity. Absolutely reliable. Marin vowed, this is what later historians said. In 1324 to 1325, Mansa Musa, the Sultan of the Mali Empire, once led a large team to Mecca for pilgrimage. This team carried a large amount of gold, a terrifying amount of gold. How much? Ferdinand II asked with great interest. My teacher has been to Egypt, and the Egyptians recorded it like this. In front of the team were 500 people holding golden rods to lead the way, each carrying 6 pounds of gold. Following them was a gold transport team consisting of 100 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold. Oh my God! That means, his team brought 33,000 pounds of gold. Ferdinand II said in horror. This number simply scared Ferdinand II. Yes, that gold can be minted into 4.2 million gold coins. Marin reported the data that had been calculated long ago. 4.2 million gold coins. Ferdinand II's saliva was about to flow out. So you mean to suggest that I occupy the Songhai Empire? Ferdinand II wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and asked. Don't worry, Your Majesty, there is another golden country in Africa. Please allow me to introduce it to you. There is another gold-producing country. Where is it? Here. Marin pointed to the map of Africa. Zimbabwe. Ferdinand II saw the Latin markings on the map. Yes, on the inland plateau in the southeastern region of Africa. Here, there is a stone city that is very rare in southern Africa. This country is rich in gold. Every year, Arab merchants go deep inland from the coast to trade with Zimbabweans, using cloth, glass and other commodities to exchange for the local abundant gold, ivory and copper mines. So, the gold production of Zimbabwe is not as much as that of the Songhai Empire? Ferdinand II thought for a while and asked. Yes. Marin did not lie. Then I might as well rob the Songhai Empire. But, Your Majesty, Africa was originally the territory of the Portuguese. If you ask for the Songhai Empire, the Portuguese will fight you to the death. That's true. Thinking of the fight with his son-in-law Manuel I on the ship, Ferdinand II knew that Marin was not talking nonsense. But Zimbabwe's gold is not as much as the Songhai Empire. Ferdinand II was a little distressed. However, Marin would not tell Ferdinand II that the Rand region of South Africa south of the Limpopo River has the largest gold mining area in the world, with a total gold reserve of tens of thousands of tons. That is the benefit that Marin left for himself, and he would not tell the Spaniards. Chapter 337, The Lame Man, Part 3, Your Majesty, the Pope has revealed such news before. He said that he intends to let Spain and Portugal divide the two gold-producing countries in Africa equally. Marin said softly. Oh, how to divide it? Ferdinand II asked with great interest. Whoever obtains Zimbabwe will also obtain the right to own Morocco. But whoever obtains the Songhai Empire will not have the right. So it's about balancing. As a veteran politician, Ferdinand II naturally understood the reason. Your Majesty, actually, this is not a balance. After all, the Holy See once gave all of Africa to Portugal. Spain can get one of the two major gold-producing countries, which is actually a cut of meat from the Portuguese, plus India will be divided into half to Spain. I guess King Manuel I of Portugal wants to kill you. This is not wrong. At the beginning, we mistakenly believed Columbus and thought that the Savage Islands were India, so we signed the stupid Treaty of Tordesillas. Oh, I really want to beat Columbus again. Columbus, who was far away at home in East Frisia, suddenly felt his anus tightened. Your Majesty, this is your excuse. Marin took the opportunity to deceive. What do you mean? The premise of signing the Treaty of Tordesillas was that Spain had discovered India. Yes, we thought Columbus had discovered India at the beginning. Ferdinand II said honestly. That's it. As for this regret, you can say that Columbus deceived Spain, the Holy See and the previous Pope. In fact, the premise of the signing of the Treaty of Tordesillas is that Spain has discovered India. Yes. Ferdinand II slapped his head and agreed with Marin's statement. Since the premise of signing the Treaty of Tordesillas was that Spain had discovered India, then the Spanish demand for rights in India this time is justified and should not be afraid of the Portuguese. Thinking of this, Ferdinand II's joystick became straighter. Then, what reason should I use to intervene in African affairs? Even if I want to get Zimbabwe, the Portuguese will not agree, right? This is simple. You announce that you will use the savage continent to exchange with the Portuguese, isn't it? What if the Portuguese refuse? Then why don't you just give up the savage continent and announce that you will divide Africa with Portugal? Give up the savage continent? I'm so reluctant. Ferdinand too was a little reluctant. Your Majesty, you occupy the savage continent at the same time, and you want to divide Africa with the Portuguese. Do you think this is reasonable? If you really want to do this, you are not right, and the church will not support you. In addition, the Portuguese will probably be so angry that they want to kill you. That's true. But Zimbabwe doesn't have as much gold as the Songhai Empire. Ferdinand too was still reluctant to give up the gold of the Songhai Empire. Your Majesty, although Zimbabwe's gold is not as much as the Songhai Empire. However, Zambia to the north of Zimbabwe is the place with the most copper in the world. The most copper? How much? Ferdinand too was a little confused. According to my teacher's estimate, here, that is, the plateau area north of the Zambezi River, the total copper reserves may reach 30 million tons, that is, about 66.1 billion pounds. 66.1 billion. Ferdinand too thought Marin was talking about 6.61 million at first, and then he suddenly jumped up excitedly. What did you say? 66.1 billion pounds? Ferdinand too was so scared that he almost fainted. This number is too scary. Before, the 33,000 pounds carried by Mansa Musa, the Golden Sultan, had already frightened Ferdinand too, not to mention the 66.1 billion pounds. Although the price of copper is far less than that of gold. However, in Europe at that time, 180 pounds of copper could be exchanged for 1 pound of gold. 66.1 billion pounds, wouldn't it be possible to exchange? Well, let me calculate. Ferdinand too spread out the parchment on the spot, dipped the quill pen in ink, and began to calculate. In the end, he got a terrifying number, equivalent to 367 million pounds of gold. Ferdinand too almost lost his seat, and Marin helped him in time. Too exaggerated, so much copper. Your Majesty, if so much copper is really mined, I'm afraid the copper will depreciate. Marin reminded. It's okay. Even if it depreciates 100 times, there are still 3.67 million pounds of gold, which is 100 times more than the 33,000 pounds that Mansa Musa carried back then. Ferdinand too is very good at math, and it seems that it was not taught by the physical education teacher. But, so much copper cannot be mined all at once. Marin reminded. That's true. But as long as this place is occupied, it will be enough to mine 33,000 pounds of copper worth gold every year. Ferdinand too still remembers the amount of gold that Mansa Musa carried. Your Majesty is wise. Marin was actually laughing in his heart. Seeing that Ferdinand too agreed to give up the horrible, wild continent, Marin was very happy. How could it be so easy to mine copper in hot Africa? Moreover, this data was explored in later generations. With Spain's current technology, it would be good to explore 1/10 of the copper mines. Then, mining is also very difficult. This series of exploration and mining can firmly drag Spain into Zimbabwe and Zambia. Then, they all look to the north, and naturally they would not pay attention to the South African region south of the Limpopo River. The South African region was what Marin wanted to take. There were not only vast amounts of gold mines, but also huge reserves of chromite, which had great industrial significance. Therefore, Marin threw out Zambian copper to attract the attention of the Spaniards and let them invest their manpower and material resources in the north, rather than in the South African region south of the Limpopo River. Moreover, with the technical strength of Europeans at that time, it was not realistic to want to mine copper on a large scale without machines. Producing a few thousand tons of copper every year was terrifying. At most, it brought down the price of copper. However, it was still impossible to make Spain soar. In the final analysis, it was a pit that held back Spain's national strength, a pit that was bigger than Zimbabwe's gold. However, it was such a big pit that ignited Ferdinand II's passion. Ferdinand II felt like he was going to explode. He walked around excitedly, then stared at Marin and asked, "Marin, are you sure there is so much copper in that place?" "I'm sure and certain, and I can swear." Zambia's copper is very famous in later generations, and Marin did not lie. However, Marin could not guarantee whether Spain could find all the copper mines in this era. Moreover, the Zambian area is about 750,000 square kilometers. Even if the plateau area is explored, it will take decades. Anyway, this pit is so big that Spain is waiting to jump. Your Majesty, even the coastal areas of Mozambique are very rich and can develop sugarcane planting. Marin pointed to the Mozambique part on the map and said to Ferdinand II. Is it tropical over there? Of course, and, Your Majesty can buy black slaves directly there for plantations. What Marin said was true. African tribes often fought each other and captured each other as slaves. It was very cheap to buy black slaves locally. Moreover, there was no need for long-distance transportation. In fact, Marin was very curious. Since the climate in Africa and America was similar, why didn't they build plantations in Africa? Later, I realized that Africa was the territory of the Portuguese. The Portuguese were weak chickens on land and had no power to conquer the black tribes on land. Therefore, they could only use trade to buy prisoners of war from black tribes as black slaves, and had no power to conquer those black tribes in Africa. Therefore, plantations in Africa did not begin to develop until the Europeans invaded Africa in the 19th century. Now, the Portuguese seem to have only opened up sugarcane plantations on the island of São Tomé. The Spanish army was much stronger than that of Portugal, especially after the emergence of the Spanish phalanx. Spain had been madly sweeping the European continent for 100 years. It was not until the appearance of the line formation of Moris and Guiri that the Spanish army began to decline. However, there is no problem at all to use the Spanish phalanx to attack those African indigenous tribes. Use the Spanish phalanx to attack the black tribes on the fertile land beside the Mozambique River and occupy good locations. Then, use cheap goods to buy tamed prisoners of war from other black tribes as black slaves, and develop sugarcane plantations and even spice plantations on the spot. Don't be too promising. Marin explained this idea in detail to Ferdinand II, and Ferdinand II became even more excited. He kept walking around the room to relieve his excitement. Then, he growled, I want Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique. I want gold, and a lot of copper, and sugarcane. However, in Marin's eyes, Ferdinand II, who walked around excitedly and growled from time to time, looked so much like Mr. Fan Wei, who took a few steps to try. Anyway, Marin could conclude that Ferdinand II had been fooled by himself. Chapter 338 Conspiracy. The next day, Marin took Ferdinand II to meet Julius II secretly. The three of them discussed how to cheat Portugal. If you want to cheat Portugal blatantly, you must have a righteous cause. Otherwise, Portugal is not so easy to mess with. For this reason, Julius II and Ferdinand II both turned their eyes to the dog-headed military advisor, Marin. Ahem. After being looked at by the two people a little uncomfortable, Marin decided to come up with some dry goods. Your Holiness, Your Majesty, if you want to overwhelm Portugal in the name of justice, it is actually very simple. Very simple. Ferdinand II was a little puzzled. Of course, Your Majesty, you signed the Treaty of Tordesillas with Portugal at the beginning. It was presided over by the Holy See, right? Yes. Then, what is the Holy See trying to do? What is the Holy See trying to do? Ferdinand II was a little confused, and then glanced at Julius II next to him. I thought to myself, Marin, you are so bold to talk about the Holy See's intentions next to the Pope. I would like to hear your opinion. Ferdinand II was very cunning and let Marin speak for himself. What the Holy See wants is naturally the glory of Christ spread all over the world. Marin said so. On the side, Julius II nodded his head. Because what Marin said was indeed high-sounding. Ferdinand II rolled his eyes when he heard it. Damn, I thought you were going to say that the Holy See was plotting for gold and silver treasures. Isn't it? Those cardinals in the Holy See are all extremely greedy for money. However, it's really hard to say such words. So, what does this have to do with us and Portugal? Ferdinand II asked puzzledly. Yes, of course. I remember that Your Majesty and Queen Isabella once captured Granada, the last pagan country on the Iberian Peninsula, in 1492. Of course. Ferdinand II said proudly. That was one of the most glorious events in Spain, and it was also the proudest thing in the lives of the Spanish royal couple. This event should be regarded as a great contribution to the great cause of Christianity, right? Your Holiness. Marin looked at Julius II. That's for sure. The Spanish expelled pagans from Western Europe and indeed made great contributions to the religious cause. That's right. Spain has made a great contribution to Christianity. So, what about Portugal? Why? They didn't preach in Africa. Julius II was a little angry. Julius II was a devout Christian and was still very enthusiastic about religious causes. He seemed very angry when he heard that the Portuguese did nothing in Africa. Of course not. The Portuguese have been operating on the west coast of Africa for decades, but most of them just built a few fortresses for trade along the coast, and didn't take preaching seriously at all. Marin was very clear about this and didn't frame Portugal. It's really outrageous. If they don't preach, what's the point of giving them Africa? Julius II was really angry. Your Holiness, we in Spain will always be committed to spreading the glory of God. At this time, Ferdinand II immediately jumped out to express his loyalty. Because such an attitude would easily make the Pope favor Spain. Of course, it cannot be said that Portugal has no missionary work at all. It is said that in Congo, West Africa, a Portuguese missionary turned their prince into a Christian. After 2 years, the old king died, the prince ascended the throne, and Congo would almost become the first Catholic country in Africa. Marin said slowly. There is such a thing. Ferdinand II and Julius II were both surprised. Yes, my teacher went to West Africa 2 years ago and heard the news there. Marin said firmly. Einstein was used as his biggest shield. Moreover, this matter is indeed famous. Since the prince who converted to Christianity became the king of Congo in 1506, the Kingdom of Congo has become the first Catholic country in Africa. Later, this matter was repeatedly boasted by the Portuguese to show off their contribution to missionary work. Of course, this is also the only bright spot in their missionary work. Then will Africa have the first Christian country? Julius II said happily. No, that is not the first Christian country in Africa. Ethiopia in East Africa, the country of the Queen of Sheba in the legend, is already a Christian country. However, they believe in Greek Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy. Humph, just a bunch of heretics. Julius II said angrily. Obviously, he did not like Eastern Orthodoxy. Marin did not care whether those heretics were heretics or not, but continued, of course, even if we wait until that prince succeeds to the throne, we have to wait for a few years, but these days, the Portuguese are not able to use this as a bargaining chip. After all, this has not happened yet, and Spain's conquest of the Kingdom of Granada can be used as a bargaining chip. Julius II and Ferdinand II both nodded. Indeed, things that have happened can be brought up. And things that have not happened yet are just speculations, which cannot be brought up. At most, they can be brought up to brag. Isn't Portugal engaged in missionary work? Julius II asked. There are definitely some, but they are a minority. Moreover, most missionary activities are spontaneous actions of priests. The Portuguese government does not seem to be officially engaged in missionary work. They are all busy making money. It is said that every year the Portuguese bring back half a ton of gold from Africa, which is about 1,100 pounds, which can probably be used to mint 140,000 gold coins. Ferdinand II's eyes lit up immediately. This man couldn't stand the news about gold and silver. And Julius II was not concerned about this. He said angrily, Humph, they only know how to make money, but not how to spread the glory of the Lord. The Portuguese really only have money in their eyes. This time, let the Lord forgive me and favor Spain for once, which can be regarded as teaching the Portuguese a lesson. In fact, Julius II had already colluded with his son-in-law Marin, and he just showed it to Ferdinand II. Ferdinand II saw Julius II say this and nodded vigorously, yes, your holiness is wise. We in Spain are willing to give up the savage continent in exchange for Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Zambia in southeastern Africa. In fact, Spain can also keep the savage continent. Julius II suddenly said. Marin was stunned, this part was not in the script. In fact, this was indeed a temporary addition by Julius II. Because Julius II had an ambition to unify Italy. Then what should Spain do? Ferdinand II asked with interest. It can keep the savage continent, although it cannot be used for the time being. However, it is also good to occupy the pit first. It's very simple. As long as Spain hands over the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily to the Holy See, then it can keep the huge savage continent. Julius II tempted. However, Sicily is the lifeblood of Ferdinand II, and the Kingdom of Naples is also very important to Ferdinand II. So, Ferdinand II shook his head firmly, forget it, I still don't want the savage continent. Sicily and the Kingdom of Naples are good. This is the difference between Ferdinand II and Isabella I. If Isabella I were here, she might consider Julius II's proposal. Because Isabella I is a strong woman with a pioneering spirit. And Ferdinand II is a monarch who focuses on the present. Therefore, Isabella I prefers to expand colonies, while Ferdinand II prefers to compete for hegemony in Europe. However, Isabella I has been seriously ill and is almost dying. And Ferdinand II attaches great importance to Spain's interests in Italy. Therefore, Julius II's proposal is useless. As for the American continent, it was actually discovered and paid attention to by Isabella I's Kingdom of Castile, and it was the Kingdom of Castile that funded Columbus's voyage to the west, and it was Isabella I's private money that was used by the Kingdom of Castile. At that time, Ferdinand II and his Kingdom of Aragon had no interest in the Great Voyage. Therefore, Ferdinand II, who was focused on the hegemony of the European continent, threw away America in a few words under the deception of Marin, and replaced it with Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique. It must be said that this was also Marin's luck. If Isabella I came to negotiate, Spain would not be so straightforward to abandon America. Chapter 339 Portugal and Japan will not accept it. Marin, Julius II and Ferdinand II conspired in the secret room of the Lateran Temple for a long time. In the end, all three of them showed a satisfied look. However, before leaving, Ferdinand II suddenly asked a question, "Your Holiness, we in Spain have withdrawn from the savage continent. So, as the Spanish savage count, should Marin also withdraw from the savage continent?" Julius II was stunned, but quickly gave an answer: he doesn't need to withdraw, because he sent troops to help Rome recapture Florence. Such a great contribution is enough for him to continue to occupy those islands. Didn't you give him 2 bishops as a reward? Ferdinand II asked doubtfully. Those 2 bishops are so poor, are they comparable to the Florence region? Julius II asked back. Ferdinand II was speechless immediately. Julius II was right. Compared with Florence, where industry and commerce are developed, Munster and Osnabrück are really poor and remote, and they are completely unequal. Then does the territory of this Count of the Wild still belong to Spain? Ferdinand II asked with concern. This was a question of sovereignty, and he had no choice but to take it seriously, even if it was nominal sovereignty. It doesn't belong to Spain anymore, but Morocco will be assigned to Spain in the future. Doesn't he have a small oasis called Leon in the south of Morocco? You can just confer him the title of Count of Leon, and he will still be your vassal. Of course, it's nominal. That's a way. Then, Your Holiness, how will the wilds be dealt with in the future? Whoever contributes the most to the Holy See will be rewarded with a portion. For example, if you give the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily to the Holy See, then I can give you the entire wilds. Ahem, let's change the subject. Ferdinand II regarded the 2 kingdoms as his lifeblood, so he was not willing to hand them over. Or, if you help me conquer Venice, I can also give you the savage continent. Ferdinand II rolled his eyes directly. Damn, Venice is so rich, if I can conquer Venice, I will definitely take it all for myself, only a fool would exchange it with you for the dangerous savage continent. Of course, if you help me take back the Rimini area, I can also divide a part of the territory for you. For example, a piece of land that is not smaller than the Iberian Peninsula. Julius II tempted. Ferdinand II directly changed the subject. He was in a quarrel with France and needed to guard against the counterattack of the French. If he messed with Venice again, it would be difficult. You know, Venice is so rich, it's not a good thing. However, Marin reminded, Your Majesty, the spice trade was originally the interest of the Venetians. You sent people to grab the share of the spice trade, which has offended the Venetians. Ferdinand II thought about it and it was true. In the past, the European spice trade was monopolized by the Venetians. Spain sent ships directly to India to buy spices, which was like snatching food from a tiger's mouth. Moreover, because there were no Arab and Egyptian merchants exploiting them in the middle, the Spanish made much more profit from the spice trade than the Venetians. Historically, the Portuguese fought a famous Battle of Gio, with the Indian and Egyptian joint fleets supported by the Venetians because of the spice trade. The cause of this naval battle was simple, which was to compete for the monopoly of the spice trade. Every year, the total amount of spices flowing from India to Europe reached 3.5 million pounds. Among them, most of the spices were transported to the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt by Arab merchant ships, and then transported to Alexandria through the Egyptian land route. Then, the Venetian merchant ships rushed to Alexandria, booked the spices, and sold them to all parts of Europe. The huge profits were shared by the Venetians, the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt, and the Arabs. The Portuguese bypassed the African continent and went directly to India to buy spices, which was equivalent to directly connecting the place of production with the market, and obtained higher profits than the Venetians. Moreover, the Gama was very wicked. He left 5 warships on the coast of India to intercept the Arab merchant ships, which aroused public anger. Later, the Venetians supported several Egyptian warships, disassembled them on the Mediterranean coast of the Sinai Peninsula, and then sent them to the Red Sea by land, and reassembled them in order to go to the Indian Sea to fight the Portuguese. Unfortunately, the main fleet of the Venetians could not reach the Indian coast. Moreover, the Venetian galleys were not convenient for placing artillery because they had to paddle on the side. Therefore, they could only place artillery at the bow and stern of the ship, and they were no match for the Portuguese warships. In the end, the Portuguese won the Battle of Dio and monopolized most of the spice trade. Since then, the Portuguese have been able to make super profits of more than 1 million gold coins in the spice trade every year. Now, under the influence of Marin, the Spanish have joined in, and the situation has become more complicated. But one thing is certain, a naval battle will inevitably break out in the Indian Sea. Apart from anything else, whether it is the Spaniards or the Portuguese, they will choose to destroy the merchant ships of the Arab merchants who go to India to purchase spices. In this way, not only can they buy more spices, but they can also cut off the Venetian supply channels. You know, the total amount of spices flowing into Europe each year is only about 3.5 million pounds. For every pound Spain and Portugal purchase, Venice will have one less pound. Conversely, if the Venetians collect one more pound of spices, Spain and Portugal will collect one less pound. Even because of competition, the purchase price of spices will be increased and profits will be reduced. Therefore, the simplest and crudest way is to send a fleet to destroy those Arab merchant ships and make competitors disappear. In this way, Spain and Portugal can swallow up the 3.5 million pounds of annual volume. After Ferdinand II left, Marin and Julius II said that Julius II even planned to support Spain and Portugal to form a joint fleet to completely cut off the Venetian spice import channels. Why? Because Venice occupied the Rimini area, which made the Pope unhappy. Julius II was happy to do anything that would bring misfortune to the Venetians. However, before that, the Holy See and Spain needed to deal with the Portuguese first. Sure enough, after the first round of negotiations officially began, the conditions offered by the Holy See and Spain made King Manuel I of Portugal furious. Manuel I blushed as he read the humiliating treaty in his hand and was speechless for a long time. After a long time, King Manuel I of Portugal, whose face was as red as guangong, suddenly threw the draft of the treaty that Julius II and Ferdinand II had revised together on the table, and then shouted angrily, "I, Portugal, Portuguese, Japanese and Chinese, do not accept it." Chapter 340. So what if you don't accept it? Manuel I's angry shout stunned Julius II, Ferdinand II and Marin. However, this matter is mainly a Spanish problem. After all, Spain wants to divide the interests of India. Therefore, Julius II and Marin both turned their eyes to Ferdinand II. Ferdinand II also knew that Spain was taking advantage of Portugal this time, and it was inappropriate for others to confront Portugal. So, he had to do it himself. Ferdinand II remembered a trick that Marin had taught him before to anger Portugal. He pretended to pick his ears carelessly, and then flicked the earwax he dug out to Manuel I and blew it. Then, he said in a nonchalant tone, "What can I do if I don't accept it?" That look, Portugal was simply not taken seriously. If there are friends who have watched too many Hong Kong movies, they can see at a glance that this is the arrogant action of the boss of the black society during the negotiation. Although the action is very indecent, it expresses the contempt for the other party vividly. Manuel I was really enraged and wanted to beat Ferdinand II, but was stopped by the guards at the negotiation site. "I want to duel with you." Manuel I shouted angrily. "What a child, who wants to duel these days? Wait until you defeat tens of thousands of Spanish troops, then come and duel with me." Ferdinand II continued to say in a rage. I ordered the powerful Portuguese navy to sink all the Spanish ships to India." Manuel I said angrily. "Well, I will send tens of thousands of troops to capture Lisbon, strip the Portuguese nobles, including you, and tie them to the cross in the square in front of the palace." Ferdinand II said viciously. "Although nobles cannot be killed casually in Europe, it is normal for the victor to humiliate the defeated. If the dignified king of Portugal was stripped naked and tied to a cross for people to see, even if he was put down later, Manuel I might not have the face to be king anymore. Because his people would also despise him. After all, not everyone in this world can be a Gojien who endures humiliation. Moreover, this is not over yet. In addition, I will find a woman with syphilis from the savage continent, have sex with you, and let you get syphilis. Although it is forbidden to kill nobles, it is not within the limit to let you get syphilis and then die of ulceration all over your body." Ferdinand II was carrying the lines designed by Marin, but he was sweating profusely. "Damn, it's too vicious." Manuel I was also scared by this vicious plan. "Damn, is it so terrible?" First, stripped naked and tied to a cross for people to see, which was a disgrace. Then, infect a person with syphilis that makes the body ulcerate and die. It's so vicious. Through this vicious plan that makes people feel cold in their hearts, Manuel I's anger was finally suppressed. Moreover, the momentum was much weaker. Next, the real negotiation began. Manuel I calmed down and stopped making noise. Instead, he looked at Pope Julius II calmly. Because he knew that Ferdinand II wanted to piss him off to death. After a long silence, Manuel I asked in a hoarse voice, "Your Holiness, why do you favor the Spanish?" "Your Majesty Manuel, I don't favor the Spanish." Julius II said calmly. "No favoritism. Africa is obviously Portugal's territory. India is also Portugal's." "Wait, what did you say? India belongs to Portugal? Who stipulated that?" "You." Ferdinand II asked disdainfully. "Isn't it? According to the papal meridian, isn't India in Portugal's sphere of influence? I remember that the reason for the division was because Spain and the former pope thought Columbus had discovered the real India. So, that was a mistake. But the treaty has been signed." Manuel I said unyieldingly. "That was the mistake of His Majesty Alexander VI. Later, didn't His Majesty Alexander VI allow us to trade in India? Obviously, His Majesty Alexander VI also realized the mistake." Ferdinand II argued. "But our treaty. Don't talk about the treaty all the time. It was a wrong treaty signed based on a wrong understanding." Ferdinand II was annoyed by Manuel I, so he shouted loudly. "Ahem, it seems to be like this. I checked the information of the Holy See. The premise of this treaty was indeed based on Columbus's mistaking the savage continent for the real India. Since Julius II wanted to side with Spain, he naturally stood up to assist. I don't care. The area east of the papal meridian should belong to Portugal. So what you mean is that all of Europe is yours? After all, Europe is also east of the papal meridian." Ferdinand II sneered and retorted. Manuel I was choked, and then retorted, "I mean the newly discovered land." Then, Ferdinand II and Manuel I had a quarrel for more than an hour. However, both sides insisted on their own opinions and ignored each other's opinions. So, Julius II coughed, attracted the attention of both sides, and asked Manuel I, "Your Majesty Manuel, I remember that when Alexander VI arbitrated the signing of the Treaty of Tordesillas, in addition to mistakenly believing that Columbus discovered India, there was another very important principle, which was to spread the gospel of God and expand the influence of the Church. Excuse me, how many churches has Portugal built in Africa over the years? How many black people have been developed as believers? In addition, Portugal also has several strongholds on the coast of Morocco. How many churches have you built there and how many believers have you developed?" A series of questions immediately confused Manuel I. How could he know how many churches the Portuguese built in Africa and how many believers they developed? The whole of Portugal, the great voyage was for trade, not for spreading the glory of the Lord. Of course, there were missionaries. However, they were basically organized by the churches in Portugal, and the Portuguese government did not pay much attention to them. Even Manuel I did not know that the crown prince of the Kingdom of Congo had become a Christian. Probably, there are a lot of them. Manuel I said uncertainly. How many are there? Julius II asked. Julius II was obviously very angry that the Portuguese did not pay attention to missionary work. This was simply disrespectful to the Lord. I don't know. Manuel I said dejectedly. It's really ridiculous. Alexander VI told you to pay attention to spreading the gospel of the Lord, but the Portuguese ignored it. It seems that giving them an inch of land is too much. Ferdinand II said in a gloomy tone. You are amazing. How many churches have you built in the savage continent? How many believers have you developed? Manuel I said angrily. Well, I know this. Before the outbreak of syphilis, we in Spain built a total of 5 churches on the island of Hispaniola and developed more than 600 locals as believers. Ferdinand II and Isabella I were both devout Catholics and paid much attention to the development of religious undertakings. Tisk, just this little. Hey, it's just a small island. It's not like you, Portugal, occupying so much land on the west coast of Africa. Excuse me, how many churches have you built and how many believers have you developed? Moreover, we also have the merit of destroying the pagan country of the Kingdom of Granada. Ferdinand II said provocatively. Well, indeed, His Majesty Ferdinand and his wife have made great contributions to driving pagans out of Western Europe. Therefore, both the previous Pope Alexander VI and myself think that there is no problem for Spain to trade in India. Julius II said seriously. India belongs to Portugal. Manuel I was still unwilling to give up. Who do you think you are? The Lord of the world. You can get whatever you want. Who stipulated that India must belong to Portugal? Which document clearly states it? But the arbitration of the previous pope. The previous pope also arbitrated that Spain can go to India to trade. Ferdinand II said angrily. In order to make huge profits from the Indian spice trade, he must defeat Portugal today. What's more, the Holy See is on the side of Spain, which makes him full of confidence. Suddenly, Manuel I's arrogance was suppressed by Ferdinand II, and for a moment he didn't know how to refute.